Good evening. Welcome to a special edition of the International Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee, of course. Tonight on International Grapevine, we're going to have the pleasure of interviewing a very interesting and great man that has been around for a good while. I'm talking about my special guest, the Honorable Gary Merritt, who happens to be an excellent attorney and, of course, also a judge. Again, this I think is very important for this thing. He has done a lot of great work all over Queens, certain part of Long Island and stuff like that. So we wanted to take the opportunity on the grapevine to have the opportunity to talk to him a little bit about the plus and minus and the way he has knocked a lot of doors down and grown. And he has been very, very well received in all over Queens and a good part of Long Island. Give us a great deal of pleasure and, of course, satisfaction to have that special guest and board of the International Grapevine. Gary, welcome to our program.
Good evening, Lee. Thank you very much for having me on this evening. I appreciate it.
Well, you're a man that usually deliver when you say you're going to do something. So we wanted to take this opportunity to kind of go down a little bit history. We wanted to find out, when we look at your background, you had a wonderful and strong background. What made you decide to study to be a lawyer?
Well, I come from a family of lawyers. My great grandfather was an attorney who was the ambassador to Cuba from Argentina. My family in Cuba had attorneys. My uncle in Spain and my cousins were attorneys. What inspired me at most was the fact that in 1960, my father left Spain in the 50s. He was born in Malaga, was raised in Cuba, became an attorney in Cuba, married my mother there, who was from the United States. And in less than a year and a half, he had to flee because of Fidel Castro. And he was an attorney. And when he arrived here, unfortunately, in 1960, he could not fulfill his dream of continuing as a attorney. So I followed in his footsteps and I made sure that I would become an attorney.
Excellent, excellent. I imagine that the fact that he tried to be an attorney before and stuff like that must have been in your mind a kind of a push to a certain extent because going to school to be an attorney, it's very extensive. It's hard work, but it's worthwhile. Were you stressful at all while you were going to school to be an attorney or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. I'll be very honest with you. I did things that weren't done before. I've always worked my whole life. I started delivering newspapers back in the 70s. At the age of 12, I went to private school. I went to Cameron Proctor, the Catholic schools, which I'm very proud of. However, when I went to college and law school, my younger brother, God rest his soul, was alive, and my parents were putting two children to school. And my father came to this country with nothing and built himself up to be the vice president of an insurance company he started in the mailroom, not knowing a word of English, and opened up his own business. So we come from a very strong work ethic. And I worked three jobs part-time and went to law school full-time, which was unheard of back in 1983 when I first started in law school. And I believe that that work ethic is what allowed me to succeed as a prosecutor, as a criminal defense attorney and private practitioner for 25 years, and as a judge because I don't have a time clock. I don't punch in or punch out. I start my day and I end my day when I'm done working.
Excellent, excellent. Well, as we started reading a little bit about you, we got extremely excited because we like your background. It is my understanding that you also attended a graduate uh, school at St. John University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration. What was that like for you back then? Because I mean, make no mistake about it. Going after a profession like this, it requires you being involved, studying, and giving a lot. What was it like to you when you got involved in that area?
Well, college was great. I'll be very honest with you. And you may ask, why would an attorney have majored in business? Well, I came from a family that was involved in business, and my father was a man who worked a lot, but when he spoke frankly. And what he said to me is I wanted to be a lawyer since high school. It's in my high school
Wow.
yearbook. And I wanted to be
Wow.
an assistant DA. And my parents said, because I was always arguing with them about something. It could be a topic from baseball to a topic from when the Vietnam War was going on. We're a family, siendo Latino, being Latinos. Even when we're not arguing, we're arguing. So my father said to me, well, now that you're going to go to college, what are you going to major in? And I said, well, Dad, people usually major in English or political science. And he said, son, that's great. What if you don't get into law school? And I went back and I said, what do you mean? He goes, what if you don't get in? There's no guarantees that you're going to go into law school. And that's where something that lacks now is that parents sometimes aren't as frank with their children instead of reality. And I said, right. He goes, because do you want to be a teacher? And I said, no. Do you want to be a professor? I said, no. He goes, well, what are you going to do with an English degree? Are you going to be a writer? And I said, no. Because honestly, my father used to get upset at me that I would score 95 to 99 in Spanish, 85 to 90 in English. And he would say, how come you can't get a 95, 99 in English and you're born in this country? Okay. So he said, son, I suggest you look into business. And Lee, back then, when people went into business field, there were companies which don't exist anymore. IBM, Xerox, Ma Bell, the telephone company, where people went to work and that's where your career was. So I decided to major in business management and I minored in economics. And it gave me an opportunity, and I thank God I did because that major allowed me to run my own practice for 25 years.
Well, make no mistake about it. Obviously, your situation is not only a dream, it's a dream that came true in reality. You climbed the ladder. Uh, Starting to be an attorney is not an easy thing. It
Wasn't
requires
easy.
a lot of, not at all. It's not easy. And to see how far you got, the doors that you knocked down. And I'm quite sure, make no mistake about it, your parents must have been very, very proud. And also to see that no matter what college or school that you went to, and he asks you whether you want to be A, B, and C, D, you never hesitated. You knew what you wanted. And the reality of the matter, you made it and you have done a great job. This is a part I wanted to ask you about. In order to attending St. John University, you were on the dean list in 1982 and a member also of the John football team. What was that like? You know,
Well,
because I asked that because I can tell the fortitude about you that you will bring it and tell us how it went. That's good.
I went to I'll be honest, in college. I did work, and here's another thing: I worked part time in college. I worked in a bowling alley in the '70s in Jackson Heights. I'm a Queens person through and through. I've been educated ever since nursery school through college. I went to Queens. I My jobs were in Queens. I worked in a bowling alley during college, and I basically worked part time all summers. I painted the whole bowling alley one summer. I was a mechanic, pin chaser. I ran the snack counter. I was a bartender. I was a porter, and ran the front desk. And I worked very hard to help pay for my tuition, which my father and me, we came to an agreement. He paid half of my tuition, and I paid the other half. And that was an opportunity. And when you talk about breaking barriers uh, and work up the ladder, I thank very much a gentleman who basically helped me in college, high school really, Lenny Carmen, who was Jewish, who hired me in 1978 and gave me an opportunity to work at the bowling alley. And I was just doing double shifts. I painted the bowling alley during the morning and I came back in the evening and worked. And he allowed me and gave me another gentleman, God rest his soul, who provided another work ethic in me. And when you talk about barriers, college was completely different back then than law school. Okay. And people don't understand it. I mean, this is when we show our age, but I'm going to be out of law school 40 years next year. And when I went to law school, it was because when I was in college in football, and I'll get to that, I played football uh, and I didn't play in high school. Okay. And I just happened to be on the phone with my coach the other day who called me about a golf outing coming up in October. And I was a walk on. And what you had to do was, I was able to bench press back then, 200 plus pounds 10 times. And I was gritty. Yeah. And I was a third string fullback. But what helped the team was that my index was over a 3.5. So it kept the team out of academic probation. Okay. So as as bad as I could, excuse the expression, screw up, they loved me because I kept the team out of academic probation. Because back then, if the GPA of the players dropped, they would become, the team couldn't play. And luckily, I developed a lot of friendships. That year was my last year playing. We won the Met Atlantic Conference. And I thanked my coach. I told him the other day on the phone, he made my life miserable on the field sometimes. And when he called me, my wife said, Coach Rick is calling. I said, well, I don't know what it is. And when I called him back, I said, Coach, I don't owe you any more punishment laps, okay? The statute of limitations has run, okay? And such. But I love playing football. And in addition to that, I played a year of lacrosse, which was also interesting because I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens.
Yeah.
Lacrosse was not a big sport like ice hockey in Jackson Heights. And what got me there was my grades. See, that's another thing. My grades, my academics. The coach, one of the coaches on the football team said, did you ever play lacrosse, Gary? I said, no. Would you like to? I said, I've never picked up a lacrosse stick in my life. And you know what? Determination. I took the stick, I went to the park, and back then, handball courts were all over the place. And I just threw the ball against the wall, and I learned how to play lacrosse. And I'm proud
Interesting.
to say I played 1 year of lacrosse at St. John's and 1 year of football. And I developed a lot of friendships and bonding.
Which is good.
Law school, just to finish, I'll give you quickly. I never,
Mhm.
in college, I never knew about potential discrimination. Law school was different. There were cliques, the Latinos, the African Americans. There weren't enough of us, so we were together. The Irish, the Italians, and there were barriers to be broken there. Okay, and the professors weren't very nice, but they made us tough, and I thank them for that.
I agree with you 100%. Make no mistake about it. One of the most important thing that you do have, and it must have come a good bit of it from your dad, you have a tremendous amount of determination to get to the line, to get what you want done, which means that you are not afraid to make the sacrifice. You are not afraid to move forward. You are not afraid of how difficult college or school might have been at a time. Your focus was that that line, you wanted to get there. And that's a humongous plus. And something like this, we hope and pray that some youngster might be watching this program and hear about your determination, hear about your spirit and stuff like that, and learn something from it. We do programs like this with people like you who have that fortitude, that importance, and more important, that determination to get things done. And you have demonstrated this in this interview. And we read a lot about you because we were very close with Nestor, who knew you very well. And I said, no, I want to meet this young man and have the opportunity to interview him and stuff like that. I saw the determination going in different thing, and you were not afraid of taking a chance and good thing. And one of the things then that you said finally that I like is when you talked about the period of time of going to school, there was a group of Latinos, there was a group of Jewish, there was a group of brothers. Those determination and those things, then it's like a ring to youngsters who are grown and want to be somebody someday. To hear you the way how you explain it, how you go about it, it's tremendous, man. It's really, really, and I hope some youngsters might be listening to this program and heard that part of it that we were talking about, your determination and the way how you carry it, and then some. Very, very, very interesting. I want to jump around a little bit on something that I read, and I read it 3 times. That it brought that you also became an assistant district attorney in Queens. And I said to
Yes.
myself, a district attorney, that's a big job as far as I'm concerned. and how difficult it is. Walk us a little bit through the assistant district attorney, and you did it for 10 years, man. For 10 years. Let's talk a little bit about that. I'll give you the floor because, like I said, I'm amazed so far and satisfied with the things that you're coming across with.
Well, just let me just also, my mother was very instrumental in this also because she was more radical than my father. Okay, she's still alive in Florida. She would say to me, "You pick a major and you kick that major. I don't want any changes." There was a motto in Casa Miret:
Hmm.
failure is not an option. Okay, so when I left law school, I did not like being in the library, which is amazing because now I have to research and do research. I love being in the courtroom. And I'm being perfectly honest for anyone listening. I was not in the top third of my class. I was in the bottom third of my class. I ranked in the bottom third of my graduating class. But I thought that, you know what? I could serve people being a prosecutor at first. And I was hired by John J. Santucci, and I thank him very much for hiring me. And I started there and I did 10 years. And I thought I was only going to stay 3 years for my commitment. But like anything else, it doesn't go like that. And in those 10 years, I met a lot of different people. I got basically trained as a young prosecutor and then later on as experienced. And I was in very different bureaus. As you can see, I was from the Criminal Court Bureau, Special Victims, which is sex crimes. I did narcotics investigation. I did Supreme Court trials. I did the rackets and economic crimes, and I did homicide investigations, which to me was a training ground that back then we called it Vietnam. 2 tours, I called it. I did 2 years because I was in the middle of the crack wars. I was there for the beginning of the crack wars. Okay. And those 2 years, Lee, the devastation of Queens County due to crack in all the communities in Queens, but especially in the Latino and African American communities was devastating. I grew up in Jackson Heights. I lived in Jackson Heights from 1964 till 1994 till I got married. I was in every different community. Those 2 years in homicide, I saw more dead bodies than I want to remember. And they were young, old, innocent people, people who got shot over drugs and such. And the community, see, that's what happened. The communities were devastated. And I would see that happening. And I thank God that I could make a difference in my community, especially Queens. And the other thing was that I appeared in front of a lot of judges. And back then, I don't want to be sound politically incorrect, but you had to be a little tougher. We had a tougher skin. I had judges who threw me out of their courtrooms. I had judges who basically told me, "Am I really an attorney?" because of what had come out of my mouth. Okay. To the point that I just want to go back to law school. And if anybody remembers The Paper Chase, which was an old movie from 1973, where the professor said, "Here's a dime, call your mother. I don't think you're going to make it out of here." Well, that happened to me, where the professor said, "Mr. Moret, come here. Here's a quarter. My contract's for it. Call your mother. I don't think you're going to make it out of here." And you know what? That gave me the determination to say, you know what? I'm not going to even make it out of here. I'm going to graduate. And that fulfilled my dream as an assistant DA. And I love the job. Greatest job ever I ever had. Okay. And if you may be sitting there going, well, why did you leave, Gary, if you were so happy? It didn't pay for me to start a family. I got married in 1994 to my beautiful wife, Norma Garcia, who was also an assistant DA in Queens. And I had to start a family. And I couldn't make it on the salary. And that's why I went into private practice. But I will tell anyone that if you want a job that basically, and you want to serve your community and you want to get experience, being a prosecutor, there's nothing like it. Okay? Because the power that's given to you is amazing. I sit back and think one thing, and I know I don't want to be lengthy, but at the age of 26, I already had the power, and I was basically sending people to jail. I look around now, and I have a child. My oldest is 27. He just graduated medical school. He's a first-year resident at Long Island Jewish. And my youngest son, Mateo, is following in his mother's and father's footsteps, and he's at Hofstra Law School. Okay? He wants to be an attorney. But if I told people, when I speak to people at 26 and they say, well, what were you doing? I go, I was sending people to jail. I had a responsibility at 26 that not many people could handle or have. And I thank John Santucci and I thank Richard Brown for allowing me to continue serving the people of Queens.
Make no mistake about it, being a district attorney and stuff like that and going through those type of things, it's not an easy thing. You see a lot of things, you experience a lot of things, and you had to ring the bell in many cases, and it's not an easy thing. Um, did it intimidate you at the beginning to be a district attorney and to see some of the things that you saw, or over a period of time it made you grow and made you stronger?
Well, I'm going to be very honest with you. Yes, it was a very little of an overwhelming experience because you're coming out of law school, you don't know much, okay? And you were thrust into court to the point that I got thrown out of a courtroom with another, my best friend, who's a judge also in Queens. And the judge said, get out and don't come back. And I was intimidated. And I went back to my bureau chief. And my bureau chief said to me, well, did you adjourn the case? I said, no, Judge Beldock, God rest his soul, who was a Met fan, which we made a connection there. And he says to me, well, get up, pick up your behind, get back in there, and don't come back until you adjourn the case. And I went back and I sat there and he looked at me. He goes, you're back? I said, I'm back. And then all of a sudden he goes, didn't I throw you out? I said, yes, but I got to stay here until I get this case adjourned. And so he waited and he called the case and I got it adjourned. And he said, approach. And this is 1986 when the Mets won the World Series. And he goes, I've got to get to the Met game. I go, Judge, I'm a Met fan also. I'm suffering here through this World Series. He goes, they got to win tonight, Gary. They got to win tonight. And with that, and it was intimidating. Okay, you ran into a lot of different judges. Being Latino wasn't easy. There weren't any Latino or Latina judges sitting in the criminal court when I was there. There was not a single elected Latino or Latina judge sitting in the Supreme Court throughout my 10 years there, if I'm not mistaken. Later on, thank God, Judge Jean Lopez, Judge Suzanne Melendez, Judge Joe Zayas. But there was no role model for me to look up to at that time as someone I can relate to on the bench. And it was. But the good thing was that with experience and being someone from Queens, I related to not only the victims, but the defendants. To the point that I was told by my good friend Jorge Santos, Cuban like me, and he said, Gary, you were one of the fairest ADAs. And I still remember that you put your name on your how can I say it to me? You put your reputation on the line by giving my client on a gun case the opportunity to basically continue being an asbestos worker. And you offered him probation, where back then it was unheard of. And I did that with many defendants who I felt that not jail is not the answer for everyone. As a prosecutor, you're there for fairness. You're not a persecutor. You're there to make sure justice is done, which is what I always made sure of, which is one of my quotes at this time outside of St. John's Law School, which my father looked at and said, that's the truth. Equal justice under the law.
I agree, equal justice. But I think one of the things that impressed me most, and I like, and even I was smiling, is how tough the judge was with you. I like that. It might have intimidated you at the beginning, but it made a tougher man out of you where you could go back to him and have a presentation and he was willing to listen. I like when a judge is tough as long
Oh,
as he's fair. As long as he's fair mind. So when you talk about that inspired me a lot. I said, man, it wasn't easy, but you took it on and you deliver, and that's a good thing. And it must have stayed in your memory for a long time, I'm
oh,
sure.
Lee, I was back then. Judges would call you names. I'm going to basically say it right now. I use it. I was a young prosecutor. I was a Knight of Raymond's. The judge also has died since. He called me a moron and a meatball on the record in open court. Okay, I know you have to laugh. And I sat there I stood, I said, my God. And at the break, I said, can I speak to you, Judge? And I said, why are you calling me that? Well, because your boss. I said, well, don't take it out on me. But what happened? It made us tougher. I didn't run home and tell my mother and my father. I didn't turn around and go to my bureau chief and say, the judge, no. Why? Because the next night I had to be right back in front of him again.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's worthwhile. Well, we also noticed that you set up your own business as an
Yeah.
attorney. Also, how long it took you to get to set up your own business, and what type of satisfaction you got over a period of time, and how large a team you had on board when you started your
Oh,
own
well,
law.
let's see. My team was myself in my practice. I had people who helped me open up my practice. I left the DA's office October 31st, Halloween. I opened up November 1st, All Saints Day. People helped me set up my practice, getting me my equipment, my office furniture. Luckily, a good friend of mine's father-in-law, who's a judge now with me, shared office space with me 24 years in Astoria.
Mhm.
However, I opened the doors to my office without a single client. I had nobody at all. I got on the 18B panel where basically, if you saw that in my resume, I basically would represent people who weren't indigent but couldn't afford an attorney, and the city would pay for me to represent them. And back then, it was $40 an hour in court, $25 an hour out of court. And I was working whatever shifts I could get. I was taking on whatever cases I could get. And I hit the ground as fast as I could running. And I'll be honest with you, I did my own typing because thank God back in 1977, just Brother James Mullen taught us to type because I was big back then on a typewriter and it wasn't electric. Okay. I was able to type 40 words a minute. So I did my own, I answered my own phones. I did my own billing. I did my own typing. I did my own research. And, my wife basically was home, was working at the time. And I had people who helped me and they would send me cases and such. But I found it to be a exhilarating experience being your own boss. Okay. Because you earn as hard as you work will determine how much money you make. And I was also there serving the community. And I also not only did criminal work, I did wills, I did real estate closings, I did business closings. Uh, I represented a lot of the Latinos in the Jackson Heights area back then and the Astoria area because there was a big selling of businesses, a big selling of bodegas being bought, being sold, and everything. And being bilingual, there weren't a lot of Latino attorneys, okay, in private practice who did things other than criminal defense. And that was my niche. And my niche was I didn't go in Jackson Heights on Roosevelt Avenue like everyone else did. I went into Astoria on Ditmars Boulevard, a block away from the train station, and I went into an area which had non Latinos, but some Latinos who now had somebody in their community that they could walk to. It wasn't the era of Zoom. It wasn't the era of working from home. People would call me and say, Mr. Moret, can I come see you? I say, what time would you like to come in? Can I come in at 8 o'clock at night? Absolutely. Why? Because everybody was working and people had to go home and take care of their children and then come and see their attorney. And it took me some
Well,
time, but I loved it. Okay. It really was. And it was hard at times. The pandemic hit and that was it hit my practice very hard. But I worked very hard and I put in, I didn't go on vacation ever for 25 years. I didn't take a vacation. My family would go to Spain because my in laws had a place there and my children went. And when people would say to me, Gary, ¿por qué tú no coges vacaciones? Why don't you go away? I said, well, who's going to pay the mortgage, the electricity, the school tuition, the overhead at my office? I mean, No one's sending me a check saying, listen, we think you need a break, so we're going to pay for everything. But I thank God I was able to do it. And I provided my children with an education, which again, it stems from what my parents gave me. I gave to my children an education, which now has resulted in a doctor and a potential lawyer, God willing. My parents gave me an education, resulted in me being an attorney, an assistant DA, a private practitioner, and now a judge.
Good. As we move forward, I understand that when you were running your own case and knowing back then how New York was, I'm sure you were hit with a lot of felony cases from almost all walk of life. How involved was these felony cases? Not each individual, just an example, so to speak.
I handle felony cases, different from misdemeanors. Felony cases are the more serious crimes. Jail is over a year. I handle felonies, everything from a grand larceny of a credit card up to a homicide. Okay. And it was very, how could I say, you were representing people who were not very good people, but they were entitled to a defense. And I would basically give them the best defense possible. I would give them my advice. I would give them what I think I could do for them. I never ever promised them that I would get them acquitted, that I would make sure they're found not guilty. Never in 25 years. Never. I would give them what the odds were. We went to trial. Some of them I would say, look, I don't suggest we go to trial because I don't think we're going to win. And you're facing a lot of jail time. And also, you're dealing with lies because you're dealing with people, not only the defendants who are your clients, but the families of these people who have been devastated because their loved one, their child, their parent, their sister, their brother, their cousin, whatever, is now been arrested and is incarcerated. And sometimes it's hard to basically get family members, as we know, familia, la sangre is strong. And they sometimes didn't want to accept the facts. So at times I would be in the office late at night with families trying to explain to them what was going on. And it took a toll. It took a toll at times. But I knew that at the end of the day, I gave those people the best defense possible.
And that's more than fair enough. We have maybe a couple of more minutes, but I want to get into one thing real fast. In 2021, you was appointed by the governor of New York State Court Claims and assigned to Queens Supreme Court Criminal Division. How was that like?
That was like hitting lotto. That was a dream. My father had an utmost respect for the judiciary. The reason I went to St. John's is because that back in the day and still now, all the judges, the governors came out of St. John's. Before you sits the only Latino who got a full scholarship to the University of Hawaii School of Law and did not go. Because my father said, you're going to St. John's. Uh, St. John's accepted me with no scholarship. Brooklyn Law accepted me with a half scholarship. I couldn't go. There was no negotiation. I was going to St. John's, and that was the end of it. And becoming a judge was lotto. It was a fulfillment of a dream. Finally, after 35 years in practice, I was able now to sit somewhere that I looked up to respect. And I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a joke because I was waiting 4 years to be appointed. 18, 21, 3 years, perdóname. Right after my father died, I had applied. And I pulled over on the road to cry because I didn't believe it. And it was a fulfillment there. And this is the next step now, because now, not only was I now enacting justice, now this year, I have been nominated by the Democratic Party of Queens County to be elected by the citizens of Queens as a justice of the Supreme Court. And this is now a further culmination of my dreams and my reality, okay? It's a dream made a reality.
Well, make no mistake about it. We want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for this great interview. But more importantly, we would hope that you get into the Supreme Court. You have the ability, you have the knowledge, you're a Queens man, And I'm sure those who know you well will get on the bandwagon to make sure you get there. You deserve it, my brother. And I don't
Thank
have
you, my
words to
brother.
thank you. And I don't
No,
have words to
thank
thank
you.
you for being
I thank you. Le doy las gracias for allowing me to share my dream here and my reality, because a lot of people don't know what was a struggle back in the day. And also, I ask that the community of Queens please support me on November 4th. October 25th is early voting. If you see the name Gary F. Moret, yes, it is a Latino name. I am Latino. And please vote. I ask for your support for me when you go to the polls.
good. Well, Gary, I think you have a strong opportunity, and we hope it works out for you. You're a Queens man. You have delivered, to the best of my knowledge, all the time. And this interview tells me a lot about you. I don't have words to thank you for being my special guest. And I hope to have you back down on the program sooner than you think.
Anytime, Lee, you call me, Wallingford, you give me a call, and hopefully, maybe after the election, if I win, I can basically speak about what it took now during my campaign for the next 2 months.
That's what it's all about. Well, again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night from the International Grapevine and saying that we hope you had the opportunity to see this program. It's an excellent and beautiful program. Gary deliver straightforward, a man with honesty, strong ideas, and determination. And again, thanks for watching our program. Hope to see you next week at the same time, in the same place. Good night.